It's difficult when you're not in the intuitive stage of creation to actually understand the difference between what you're creating and what you want to create. That gap, how your stuff actually gets better. I'm going to outline a system that has proven effective in teaching students how to understand and create visual work. Stay tuned to the end of the video when I give you some exercises that you can do to drastically increase the quality of your work. How do you teach someone how to make good images? How do you actually teach illustration, photography, design, painting, drawing, videography, or any other way to make an image? It often sounds like this. Look at this professional work. It's good, right? Now look at your work. It's bad. Look at it. It's bad. Don't you see that it's bad? Stop being bad and start being good instead. You can kind of see why that is not a super helpful approach to teaching. So I've been working with some colleagues to come up with a more specific and measurable way to understand and create images. I've constructed a system to help people understand the components of an image so that you can learn to deconstruct references and influences and use that to create your own work, moving away from derivative copying and towards transformative original work. What is an image? First, there are elements, the things or nouns in the image. Second, there's a composition, the arrangement of those elements within the space, placement, size. Think of design principles. Then there is the style, the visual choices made to execute that composition, okay? The mark making, the medium, those types of things. Then there's the concept, what is communicated, the meaning, the message, the vibe, the idea. So the elements are the things in the image, the composition is the arrangement of those elements, the style is the execution of that composition, and the concept is what's being communicated by the combination of the elements, composition, and style. So to give you some examples, a series of illustrations and designs that are of a VW bus. The style is the main thing that's changing. Some of these are a little bit more childlike. Some of these are a little bit more mature. Some of these are a little bit more playful. Some of these are a little bit more subdued, more vintage and retro, more modern. And all of that is based on the aesthetic choices, the stylistic choices that are being made to change the thing. But the composition is largely the same. The elements, basically the bus and the surfboard, largely the same. Now, there's, the occasional butterfly or moon or blanket or chair, but the composition, dead center, horizontally placed. Style, the aesthetic choices, how thick those lines are, how thin those lines are, if there are lines, the variation in color, the color schemes themselves. Let's go through kind of this ball. This is the same exact composition, same exact elements, largely the same colors, but changing the brush that I'm using just changes the mark making that's happening. That mark making in the changes of those brushes largely changes how it feels. Some of these feel a little bit more aggressive. Some of these feel a little bit more naive. Some of these feel a little bit more mature. The concept shifts slightly in mood based on the type of marks that are made. So there's a very stylistic changes in that type of mark making. When we talk composition, that's the placement of those elements, right? And so we can look at this and we can have like an hourglass composition. And you can see that all of these posters are in some variation of an hourglass, some more obvious, some more subtle. Okay, or we can have a Z pattern composition where we have things flowing horizontally and then diagonally and then horizontally again. And that can be a little bit more extreme, a little bit more obvious, a little bit more subtle, more curvy or more straight. These two very different waves, even though the placement and the size and the flow of those waves is basically the same. The elements themselves have changed from, guitars and violins and musical instruments to monsters and fish and boats. Lest you mistakenly think that I'm only talking about illustration here, you can see these photographers and filmmakers using the same hourglass or Z-pattern compositions. Now, these are only two examples of compositional patterns. There are many different types of effective compositions. Identify them, sketch them, and then change up the elements, style, and concept when you use them. And so the idea that you have is you have this continuum of derivative versus transformative. And you've probably heard of this when you're talking about copyright and the idea of fair use. There are a number of things that come into fair use, and the derivative and transformative continuum is probably the most important of those things. And what I'm suggesting is that the more you change one of these things, the more you change the style, the elements, like what the actual things are that are in there, the placement of those things, that concept changes quite a bit. There's also this idea where the composition and the style remain largely the same, and most of the elements remain the same, but the message drastically changes because of a couple of elements that change. You see in this original Norman Rockwell painting that we've got kind of a Mayberry situation, a sheriff that's sitting next to a kid at an ice cream parlor, and then in this version of it that's been changed, we change some of those elements. The kid becomes a black child. The cop becomes kind of more militarized in like SWAT or riot gear. And it takes on a more threatening thing. It is a commentary on police brutality and things like that because of a couple minor changes in the elements. The main elements that we have the police there, we have a child there, we've got soda or some sort of countertop that they're sitting at with stools. Those all stay the same, but those minor changes in the way that the police are dressed, the color of the child's skin, drastically change in the face of the zeitgeist, the message, the concept of that idea. And I would consider that pretty transformative in the message. It is intentionally a callback and fairly derivative of the placement of those elements, which we'd call the composition, the elements themselves, and the style. But in changing a couple of those elements, it changes the concept fairly significantly. So that's what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about being able to come in and make these choices. Now, another thing to consider is if you want to become more and more transformative, or what we might call original or unique, not copying. The idea would be multiple sources. You might steal the color from one thing, the composition from another thing, the elements from 2 or 3 other things, mixing those up and trying to get your concept across. You might do this.
When a seasoned professional says an image is good or bad, years of experience and all of the intricacies of what I've begun to introduce here are being calculated to come to that conclusion. The best way to increase your skills, knowledge, and instincts is to repeat this cycle. Create things. Pay attention to what you learn from creating things. Use this new understanding to analyze and deconstruct professional work. Then use what you've learned from the professional work to create better things. Rinse and repeat. I hope that understanding the basic components of images will give you a framework to get started as you deconstruct professional work. To that end, here are 2 exercises that you can do right now to improve your art. The first is called style switching. Find an image with a visual style that you'd like to understand. Now take a basic composition like this bird or this ball and apply the reference style to the basic composition. The second is called element swapping. Take 2 different images and make a list of all of the elements in each image. Then quickly sketch the basic shapes in the composition of both images. Now take the elements from one image and sketch various ways to put them into the composition of the other image, vice versa. Both of these activities are action-based and should get you out of the paralysis of inspiration scrolling. I'll go into detail on these exercises in future videos in this series, and I'll also be doing live streams of me using these techniques to study and improve my own work. Get on the newsletter so you don't miss out at coreykerr.com/email. Now, go make stuff.